introduction, I guess you will, to what we're going to do. I want everybody to open your Bible to the 139th Psalm. And I say that because I want you yourself to read it. I want you to look at the words and read this with me, not out loud, but. And I want you to understand what God knows about you. Okay? And well, maybe if we understand what God knows about us, then maybe it'll help us in our examination. But the 139th Psalm, to me, is just a beautiful, I find it to be a beautiful psalm. Because it kind of puts things in perspective for us. So let's read it together. I want you to notice the words, please. It says, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light around about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you, when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed. And in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, you bloodthirsty men, for they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, who hate you? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred, and I count them my enemies. Now these last two verses should be your invitation. This should be maybe your last words to your Father at night. He says, the writer says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. That should be our plea to God every day. I don't know if any of y'all ever gets down towards Fort Payne on Old Highway 11. I know Ivan and Dakota probably do. But there's a little congregation down there. It's a denomination, but they've always got the absolute best things on their sign. Don't they, Ivan? And this one here will really make you think. What if you woke up this morning with what you thanked God for yesterday? Think about that. Just think about that. What if I woke up this morning with, and only with, what I thanked God for yesterday? That ought to put things in perspective, shouldn't it? We can't show enough thanks to our Father, and He knows us, as the psalmist just said, inside and out. He knew us before He formed us in our mother's womb. He knew the substances that would put us together and make little humans out of us. He knows you. And not only does He know you, He loves you. And He cares about you. And all He wants in return is for you to love Him. That's it. Just love Him. Because if you love Him, you'll serve Him. Anybody has a need, we ask you to come as we stand and sing.
God is calling the prodigal, come without delay. Hear, oh, hear Him calling, calling now for thee. Though you wandered so far from His presence, come today. Hear His loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come. Calling now for thee. Weary prodigal, come. Come, there's bread in the house of thy Father, and to spare. Hear, oh, hear Him calling, calling now for thee. Oh, the table is spread and the feast is waiting there. Hear His loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come. Calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come. Let's go to classes.
Why, Ken, there you are. Didn't know if you was here tonight. I believe we left off last week on page 5. And Ken had brought up the question about something I know that confuses us all. It really confuses me, and after I read it, I was still confused. But this is a fellow by the name of John E. Walvoord. He taught basically the premillennial doctrine for years at the Dallas Theological Seminary. He's had a huge influence on a lot of seminaries, which you don't put out a lot of denominational preachers. And so I just wanted to read what he had to say about that. In this particular section, calls it Spiritual Life in the Millennium. And then subpart 3 is the Millennial Temple and Worship of God. And he says in this section, the only real problem in connection with a future literal temple is not the question as to whether such a temple could be built in the millennium, but the fact that this would indicate also a literal interpretation of the temple ritual and sacrifices. He says this introduced some real problems. He says allusions are made to these sacrifices in the details of the construction of the temple, Ezekiel chapter 40. Your millennialists look at Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48 as a description of the temple that's going to be built during the time of Christ's reign in Jerusalem. And that's one of the reasons they really look at the book of, well, let me just tell you what he, boy, I wish I had highlighted that. Yes, ma'am.
What page are you on?
Well, this ain't got nothing to do with the page I'm on, but eventually number 5. Yeah, Ken had asked a question. They're going to, according to the dispensational premillennialist view, there will be the offering of animal sacrifices in the 1,000-year reign. And so one of the things they do, because, you know, all your premillennialists take Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones, and apply that to a future resurrection of the Jews instead of what Ezekiel applied it to, and that was the establishment of the Lord's people again in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is writing, you remember this, he's in Babylon. He's in Chaldea, writing about the Valley of Dry Bones, and that part of his book, the last part of his book, I don't know where exactly it starts, but he has to shift gears from telling them, look, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, to saying, okay, we're going to go back. Many of those living would not. They're going to be there 70 years total. The group Ezekiel came with is probably going to be there about 50 of those. And so a lot of those guys are not going to go back, but their children are going to go back, and as a nation. And so that Valley of Dry Bones, you have resurrected bodies, if you will. The bones become flesh and all of that, and the spirit of life is breathed back into them. That's talking about the Jews coming back to Jerusalem, Ezra, Nehemiah, and during the time of Esther and all that stuff. They say that that's future, and then they use Ezekiel's temple description, which, boy, if you've ever read that, it's difficult reading. I read it once a year. Yeah.
So it's completely confusing to me in light of what Jesus said.
Yeah, don't worry about that, Chris. We're not talking about what Jesus said. These guys are not concerned with what Jesus said, really. Do what?
I thought you and me were.
Yeah, and we're going to get all into that in the next chapter when we start talking about the kingdom. Is it established or is it not? But all this I'm talking about right now is a question that Ken posed about how do they get this sacrificial system back in? Well, if you're going to have Jesus come back and you're going to rebuild the temple, then that's what he's just saying here. That necessitates a rebuilding of the temple. Now, he realizes that's going to cause some problems, and so he answers that. Because people are going to say, well, you mean you're going to offer animal sacrifices again? Those things have not been done. But notice, this fellow A.C. Gabriel, who he quotes from, writes in, well, I guess I need to back up a little bit from that. It has been fitting for the church in the present age to have a memorial of the death of Christ in the Lord's Supper. It is suggested that it would be suitable also to have a memorial of possibly a different character in the millennium in the keeping with the Jewish characteristics of the period. This is all false. Everything I'm reading here is as false as the day is long, okay? This is just how he explains it. This fellow Gabriel, who he quotes, writes in support of this view. But what is the meaning and the purpose of these animal sacrifices? Well, that's what me and you'd ask. Why in the world would you want to do that? The answer is quite simple. While the sacrifices Israel brought once had a prospective meaning, you know, the Jews offering up lambs and so forth were looking towards the cross, if you will. He says the sacrifices brought in the Millennium Temple have a retrospective meaning. So what's he saying? They're going to look back to the cross, not to the cross, but to look back to the cross. He says, when during this age God's people worship in the appointed way at his table with the bread and the wine as the memorial of his love, it is a retrospect. We look back to the cross. We show forth his death till he comes again. Then this memorial feast ends forever. Never again will the Lord's Supper be kept after the saints of God have left the earth to be with the Lord in glory. The resumed sacrifices will be the memorial of the cross and the whole wonderful story of the redemption for Israel and the nations of the earth during the kingdom reign of Christ, and what a memorial it will be. So, all of that, what is he saying? Now we take the Lord's Supper and we're looking back to the cross, but what are we also looking for? His return. He's saying when Jesus comes back, sets up his kingdom in Jerusalem for 1,000 years, that they're going to rebuild the temple. They're going to reinstitute the Levitical priesthood. They're going to offer up sacrifices and so forth. And those are going to look back to the salvation that Christ brought. That's just not biblical. But you can appreciate their being handcuffed to the idea of Ezekiel's temple being literal. And so they say, well, if you're going to have a literal temple, you of necessity have to have literal priests and so forth, right? And so that's, at least, you know, they realize that implies, well, we'd go like, see, it ain't true. And they go like, well, no, what you don't see is it's a totally different thing. It's not Bible. You won't find it in the Bible. And brother, you're not going to find this doctrine in the Bible. And that's, you know, one of the things that I don't want us to get too bogged down because it's just not there. It's simple. It's what they're trying to say is not there. We stopped on subpoint 3 on page 5, talking about several things were wrong with the theory that R.H. Bowl put first. It says, at first, it makes the coming of Christ a failure. It casts reflections upon the omnipotence of God, and that's just a fancy word. Omni being all potence, what he knows, his power. He is unable to do what he intended. It also casts reflection upon the omniscience, his knowledge, and suggests he did not know the right time to send his son. And it makes the church a mere afterthought, which the Bible teaches that the church was in the mind of God from the beginning, from, you know, when you started to build the, and C is the main point. For the millennialist, everything from Genesis 1 to Revelation 20 comes together in Revelation 20. It makes Revelation 20 the focal point around which all the rest of the Bible is to be interpreted. As Mr. Wolford says in his book, you have to look at the Bible through premillennial glasses to even understand the promise given to Abraham. That is a perpetual promise, never to be broken. That's why they'll tell you the Jews today are saved. Can't you read Genesis 12? Can't you see where God said Israel was his chosen people? And no matter what they do, they're going to be saved, which is just foolishness. I was reading in Leviticus today. Leviticus, I think it's the 26th chapter. It reads just like Deuteronomy 28. If you do these things, then I'll bless you. But if you don't, curse, 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 curse. I'm going to wipe you out. I'm going to take you off. I'm going to blot you out. And yet, our millennial friends have to just kind of ignore that and say they're still God's chosen people. And what did Jesus say? If you believe not that I am he, what did he say? You will die in your sins. Just as plain and simple as it can be. But when you have a false idea, sometimes you're forced to say some things foolish. Yeah, that's something that we'll have to look at another time. John Hagee calls it a codicil. Codicil is Romans chapter 9 through 11. A codicil is a legal document. And he's saying that what happens in Romans 9 through 11 only pertains to the Jews. He's only talking to the Jews. And so that's separate and apart from the rest of the book of Romans. Why does he do that? Why does John Hagee preach that? because it kills everything that he says. Because Paul says, I wish the Jews were saved. I'd give myself if my countrymen could be saved. It obviously destroys what he's trying to say, so what does he got to do? He's got to pull an Olin Hicks on Matthew 19. He has to pull a J.D. Bales on Matthew chapter 19. He's got to somehow get it out of the text. J.D. Bales would say that the Matthew 19 does not apply to non-Christians. The only people that Jesus is talking to with the covenant, the marriage covenant there, are Christians, which is absolutely foolishness. But Brother Bales was trying to tie up some loose ends on a false doctrine. Dan Billingsley did the same thing. That's why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John aren't gospel. They're Old Testament. He's got to do that to get rid of that doctrine. And so the same thing, we're seeing. What you have to keep in mind is you're trying to think about this from a Bible perspective. They are not. Okay, so just kind of go with what they say, and then we'll talk about the Bible reason for which it ain't right. But, as we're trying to navigate this, let's just let them say what they're saying, okay? And then try to, like the next chapter, we dive right into it. We're going to be talking about the kingdom and the church, okay? And what the Bible has to say about the kingdom and the church, and not what they have to say about the kingdom and the church, because they're dead wrong on the kingdom. They've got the kingdom and the church being two distinct things. One's happening now till Jesus can get around to building the other. And it's just absolutely false. So rather than just be patient with what we're talking about. And sometimes you're going like, well, that isn't what, you're right. Absolutely. Boy, I wouldn't deny that at all, and I'm not denying that. Hope y'all remember that we're looking at a false position made up by people who do not believe in the all supremacy of God. They do not believe in Bible prophecy, nor do they believe that Jesus came in the fullness of time, nor do they believe he's the all-powerful Son of God. They're just not there. And that's not the way they would put it, okay? That's not the way they put it. So let's kind of try to drive on here. Notice he says the majority of conservative believers in the inspiration of the Bible today hold to some form of premillennialism. That's just about everybody in the Protestant world. When I first started preaching, the number was at 70. I've seen some people say it's at 80 today, even though a couple of the podcasts I used to listen to about 7 years ago, the ones I was listening to are not active anymore. They were language podcasts. And they were saying that, a lot of the evangelicals, they call themselves, are moving away from denominational, dispensational premillennialism. What we're looking at, dispensationalism, is the most popular. Dispensational differs from regular classic premillennialism on several points. Notice, classic premillennialism does not necessarily require belief that the days of creation represent day age of representation. Creation represents ages or dispensations. Classic P believes that the church was a part of God's original purpose, but holds to a belief in the future millennial reign on earth. In other words, the church wasn't an accident, it was part of it. That's classic. And then last there, classic premillennialism does not make the first coming of Christ a failure or the church or an afterthought. That's important to establish that, because when you look at the restoration movement, some of the people that we have grown to love over the years, we will find some of them were in this camp, okay? And we shouldn't let that freak us out. People have been wrong about things before, even our own brethren. And a couple of them that come to mind, T.W. Brents, and who was that, the gospel scheme? I've got it in there. T.W. Brents was one of the fellas. He was the president of the school up there in Spencer for a while, and then we have another fellow wrote a book. And these guys were important in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I can't remember his name right now, but let's go ahead and let's look at these questions real quick. What does millennium mean? 1,000 years. What is premillennialism? They say that we're living, it's before the 1,000-year reign. Post means that we've already had the millennium, and now we're living in the after part of it. And amillennialist believes that it's more of just a figurative description of something that's not set in stone. So which one of the three above views is the most popular? Definitely dispensational. What are some of the things that must happen before Christ comes again? Well, I just said refer to page, well, that can't be right. Wouldn't go all the way back to page 2, would we? I don't think so. Am I in the wrong page? Why in the world are y'all even following me? I'm in the wrong thing. Shame on me. Yeah, it was. Thank you. Well, let's just go ahead and hit those questions. Where did we stop? I don't even have it marked then. Stopped on the questions? Yeah. I don't even have it written down. Well, never mind. Number 1, who were some of the prominent premillennial preachers today? John Hagee, Hal Lindsey, Billy Graham at the time, his son, Franklin. Has premillennialism ever invaded the church? Yes. How did William Miller arrive at his day method? Remember, a day for a year. Who organized Miller's followers into the Seventh-day Adventists? That would have been James White, particularly his wife Ellen. She was the one that had the visions and became their prophetess. And she would tell you that John 14:16 is talking about her. What does John 14:16 say? I will send you a comforter, and he will bring you in remembrance of what? Everything that I've said, and he will guide you into all truth. She said, that's me. Woo! Isn't that amazing? Everybody's been John 14:6. Muhammad, he'd tell you he's John 14:6, you know. Tookie, are you trying to say something? Don't ask me. Don't ask me, because clearly I have no idea. Everybody's telling me page 13, so that's what I'm rolling with. We're on about question 4 on page 13.
This woman that claims to be the company,
Yeah.
what year was this?
Uh,
Claimed to be the company.
19,
That's good enough.
yeah.
How could he say to his apostles, I'm gonna send you the comforter, but she don't come for 2 more thousand years or whatever?
Same way, I mean, obviously she's just making it up. Yeah, but the same way Muhammad would tell you he's the comforter. You know, he's the prophet that was to come after Christ. Ellen G. says she's
They
the...
wanna pull that out of scripture.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Then they wanna say, I'm the comforter that he said was gonna come
Yeah.
to the apostles.
Well, we've got some people here in our room I know a lot about Sabbatarianism. And listen, those guys, they know their Bibles. And they'll flat sling it at you. I mean...
They know what I'm saying makes sense, and what they
Yeah.
say don't make sense.
They've got listen, most of those fellas have got an argument. Might not be right, but they've got one. And they'll, I mean, first of all, they believe that she said she went to heaven. And when the angel took her up there, he showed her that number 4 in the commandments was circled in gold. That's because that's why they had failed. That's why their predictions had been off. And so they were supposed to keep the Sabbath and make it holy. And she said, that's where we've messed up. And they already had a leaning towards that anyway. And man, that just opened it up. And, you know, that's why I told you last week, I think it was, my cousin was dating an Adventist. She lived up in Collegedale. And me and her went round and round. I'm 12 years old, you know. She's, you know, grown. And but one thing I knew was that God said that hell was forever, you know. And they do not believe that. Why do they not believe that? See, that's one. I had a lady chew me hadn't been that many years ago. And she just told me, look, my husband, he believes there's a hell. He believes, you know, and I'm going like, well, if he wants to look at his prophetess, you know, if you're going to say she's the prophetess, if you're going to say that she is inspired of God, and she says, and basically what she says is there's a hell, but when you get there, you won't be there long. They believe in what's called annihilation, and that means you just, you know, once you die, you just cease to exist, because they say the gift of God is what? Eternal life. And they say you can't be alive, even if you're in hell, you can't be alive, because then you'd be receiving the gift of God, and you're not going to have that. So you would just cease to exist, which, you know, that might be same thing with Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses say the same thing. And, you know, that's where you get your soul sleeping. You'd be amazed how many people I've had in class try to teach me that. Soul sleeping means when you die, you're just hanging out, right? You're just waiting. Yeah, you?
Some do follow that soul sleeping thing too.
Any ideas? No? Do they believe in soul sleeping as well? Do the Adventists buy into it?
Soul sleeping.
Soul sleeping, yeah.
Because my daughter-in-law used to be a Seventh-day Adventist.
And she said that?
Well, I don't know, I'm gonna ask her now.
Oh, okay, okay. 'Cause- It's one way to find out, yeah.
History, but period of, because, well, the witnesses and the.
Right out of there.
All of them all
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, in fact, I think what's his Taz Russell, I believe he was actually a part of that movement, kind of branched out and had his own thing. Now listen, if you read their accounts, you know, like Charles Taz Russell, the one thing that really stood out to me, when he was on trial, he was suing a Baptist preacher, because this Baptist preacher said he was full of blue mud. He didn't know what in the world he was talking about. He wasn't a Greek scholar, and he wasn't a Hebrew scholar. And so this man, this Taz Russell, who starts the Jehovah's Witnesses, was actually suing him for defamation. Well, the Baptist preacher's attorney simply just brought in the Greek alphabet and said, okay, what's this letter here? And he didn't know them. And so he said, how can you be a scholar in a language and you don't even know, you know, the alphabet? But now if you go to their websites and you read about that, you'll see that he answered it differently. What you need to do, though, is look at the actual court records. For instance, you can't swear if you're boy, I know this is off subject, isn't it? We ought to be studying denominational doctrines. That's okay. Well, we are, aren't we? In a sense. But you can't swear. Yet all the big wigs and the Jehovah's Witnesses all had visas. And you know what you have to do in order to get a visa? You have to take an oath. And so, I mean, there they've got them. They're in print, you know, and that's one of the things you try to show folks. And remember when Jesus said, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, whatsoever they say, you know, you do it, but don't follow their ways, because they bind heavy burdens and aren't willing to bear any of them. You know, they tie heavy burdens on men and won't so much as lift their finger. And the same thing with these guys. If you get it, I don't know if you'd want to do it or not, but Judge Rutherford, who went on to begin the Watchtower magazine, called it Awake, he built a mansion. He built a mansion in San Diego, but he built it for Moses. Yeah, he built it for Moses and Isaac and Jacob. They were going to live there, but he was going to live in it until they got there, right? And you can go and you can look at it. Then the thing that will stick out to you, and you'll notice it, is the roof has got this little like round thing on top. And you know the lighthouse that you see on the front of Awake magazine when they try to give you one or make you buy it or whatever? It's that emblem, you know. And I thought, well, man alive, ain't that something? But this was during the Depression, so you can imagine how hard money was to come by. But he had two 16-cylinder Cadillacs, and plus that nice mansion. But he was saving it, you know, for Moses.
During the Depression.
Isaac, yeah, during the Depression. Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
According to the internet, in Seventh-day Adventists, we believe in the concept of social teaches that a person, in Seventh-day Adventist teaching it is a doctrine teaches that when a person dies, their soul does not go to anything, heaven or hell, but instead remains in an unconscious state or sleep until the resurrection of the second coming. And all that comes from Ecclesiastes 9:5.
Yeah, you also in Daniel, they want to hop over there too. Had a fellow do that one night. I couldn't figure out where in the world he was going with that. But immediately I know what you're thinking, and I would think too. Isaiah, Luke 16. What does Luke 16 say? Lazarus died and was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom. And it says the rich man also died and was buried and raised up his eyes, being in torments. You get the impression from reading Jesus's.
Get them off the door too.
Well,
Because, you know, I didn't know anything about none of this stuff. I haven't shown up my house, you know. So we were talking and studying, and somehow or another, I brought this account of Lazarus up. Well, you know, we've always got Grand Grandpa, Mama, or somebody in the background, because they let the young ones come
Oh, yeah.
to the top. this account and I read it, I didn't know that it was gonna debunk their whole doctrine. But I read that and she promptly said it's time to go.
Roger that.
You know,
You-
so if you wanna get rid of them, bring the story up of Lazarus, and they won't stay long.
Yeah.
They won't.
Yeah, I mean, it just, flat out. Yeah, and like when you're dealing with the elders, the Mormon elders, they're like 16, don't shave. First thing I started, I used to ask them how the wife was, because in order to be one, you got, to be an elder, you got to have a wife, right? But they have to have a card to buy underwear, to buy this holy underwear they wear when they're on this mission. And so I just asked them where their card is. And immediately they knew that I probably knew a little bit more than, boy, we didn't get nowhere. But anyway,
That's called spending half the class
on the wrong page, though. We got a good review, though. Had a good review. You got to have this card to buy this underwear you got to wear while you're on this mission. And these young boys, and so I just asked them, said, guys, listen, what you're believing, what you're teaching ain't true. I said, we read the Bible because it's confirmed by miracles. And he said, we got miracles. I said, man, that's great. Show them what do you got? He said, well, Jesus appeared somewhere down in South America, in the last 100 years. And I'm like, and you don't know where? I mean, if I'm going to believe a book and it's supposed to be confirmed by miracles, I think I would have asked where that at. Let's nail these questions real quick. The two dates that were set for the Lord's return when Russell was 1874, and he counted from that and said 1914 would be the day of the retreat, the Lord would return. Said, who predicted millions now living will never die? That's Judge Rutherford. He took over the Jehovah's Witness movement when the first guy, Charles Tazer, died. What was the latest date set by the Jehovah's Witnesses? 1975. Was Alexander a premillennialist? He was not, but he was a millennialist. His first book, if you remember, since a book, quarterly paper, was the Millennial Harbinger. Notice, were any of the pioneers in the Restoration Movement premillennialists? Yes, but they were classic premillennialists, and they didn't divide the church over. In fact, they were just trying to figure out what all that was talking about. Who founded the Christadelphians? That'd be a fellow by the name of John Thomas, who was going off the works of W.L. Gibbs. Now, we're talking about erring members of the church here, okay? Who led the premillennial effort to infiltrate Churches of Christ in this century, which is actually last century, the 1900s. That was R.H. Bull. And who was responsible for basically putting that down? Foye Wallace would be your man. He was the man. There's a lot of guys did some good work. Brother Nichols, little Nichols Pocket Encyclopedia. He but he was working with Brother, at the time they were both at the Gospel Advocate. Notice, has the kingdom come? Lesson 3. We got 2 minutes. What's that? How far can we get? On page 14. You know what? I'm going to write the date on here, and this is where we stop. I usually do that all the time. I feel so bad. That'll be February, won't it? Man alive. That God planned to establish a kingdom on this earth is admitted by all who believe the Bible. The only thing is, what's the nature of that kingdom? However, the time of the establishment and the nature of the kingdom are both subject to controversy. Has the kingdom already come? Well, I sure hope it has, because Paul thought he was in it and thought that we were translated into it according to the Colossian letter. John, he didn't. He thought he was in it according to Revelation chapter 1, I believe it's about verse 7.
Peter was given the keys to it.
He was given and he used them, didn't he? Is the kingdom spiritual in nature? Is the kingdom spiritual in nature and identical with the church, or will it be a material, physical thing? And that is the crux of the matter, brethren. We teach, and I believe rightly so, the Bible teaches that the church of Christ, that the kingdom of Christ is spiritual, and that Jesus is ruling and reigning right now, according to Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2. This same Jesus whom you have by wicked hands taken and crucified and slain, had God raised up to sit at his right hand. If you remember, when Stephen is being stoned to death in Acts chapter 7, he looks and sees the Lord, if you will, standing on the right hand of God. We will pick up right here on number 3 next week, because we're going to be doing a lot of scripture next week. You've got to be able to draw the dots. If you can remember Isaiah 2, Joel 2, Daniel 2, Acts 2, and Ephesians 2, you can knock this bad boy out of the park and never really come off the tracks. You can take them from the prophecies of Isaiah 2, saying where it's going to be built. Daniel will tell you when the days it's going to be built. Joel will tell you some of the things that's going to happen when it's built. Peter will say, this is it. And then Ephesians chapter 2 will show you how that the Jew and the Gentile are both now reconciled into this thing that was prophesied by Isaiah, Joel, Daniel. And you put it all together and it makes such a nice box and it fits so well. And trying to think of some wild outlandish stuff that's going to happen down the road. Just so, as my bus pastor's wife used to say, I could be the governor of Arkansas. You know, boy, amazing, right? Appreciate your good attention. Sorry about taking up 15 minutes in chapter 1, but boy, I thought we was having a good time. Anyway, Kenneth, would you be kind enough to close us? Amen. Don't forget, Sunday night is singing night. Drink a lot of honey for your voice. Isn't that what people